Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is an absolute pleasure to welcome you all to today's webinar on corporate plagiarism during remote work era. My name is Athar Varvikar. I am now a proud alumni of the University of Wollongong in Dubai and one of the MCs for the event today. Along with me is Shruti Ramdas, student board member of the Center for Academic Integrity in the UAE, and Serene John, the chair of the student board at the center, who will also be MCing with me today. Both Serene and Shruti are undergraduate students at the Gulf Medical University in Ajman. So a quick look at the agenda for today. From 10:35 a.m. to 11 a.m., we have the welcome and keynote speech by Dr. Zinat Reza Khan on corporate infringement and corporate plagiarism. From 11 a.m. to 11:15 a.m., we have an invited talk by Ms. Verena Kunz-German from Original on text matching software and its growing corporate clients. From 11:15 a.m. to 11:30 a.m., we have an invited talk by Dr. Laura Gorda from Fitch Co. Legal on UAE laws and implications on infringements. From 11:30 a.m. to 11:50 a.m., we have a panel discussion on how academic community can support support corporate and professional community within and outside the academic institutions. The panel includes Dr. Christopher Hill from BUID, Professor Gomti KG from Gulf Medical University, and Dr. Zinat Reza Khan. The session will be moderated by Ms. Vinita Matthews from Sustainable Minds. And lastly, from 11:50 a.m. to 12 noon, we have the Q&A session and the closing. So as you all can see, we have a power-packed 90 minutes and we request your cooperation to conduct the session with limited disruption and lots of engagement. This webinar would not be possible without our partner, Sustainable Minds, that is a Dubai-based corporate sustainability and responsibility communication and consulting provider of a comprehensive and diverse set of professional services to a board client base, and Original, a company that delivers cutting-edge technology in the field of text matching and plagiarism prevention. We also thank all our speakers today for their time and sharing their experiences. Without any further delay, I take the pleasure to invite Dr. Zinat Reza Khan, President of the Center for Academic Integrity in the UAE and an assistant professor at the University of Wollongong in Dubai, to give her keynote. An award-winning lecturer and researcher, Dr. Khan is also an active audit board member of the European Network for Academic Integrity, recipient of the International Exemplary Research Award, and editorial board member for prestigious international journals and book series. Over to you, Dr. Khan.
Thank you so much, Athar, and a warm welcome from Dubai to all our audiences who've joined. We actually do have quite an exciting panel of speakers that are going to be coming through, and we do have audiences coming through from a variety of different countries, not just the UAE. So it's an absolute pleasure to be here to talk to you guys about this topic that we've been somehow working towards for almost a year now, looking at the corporate sector, outsourcing, remote work, and of course, the kind of issues that seem to be going hand in hand. Before I do go ahead, a quick lesson that I've learned from a very close friend and mentor, Dr. Teddy Fishman, that I should be giving a disclaimer. Some of the topics and slides that I am going to be presenting today have been presented in previous sessions that I have done in schools and seminars throughout the year. So let's talk just some brief background to what is it that we're really talking about today. So we'll start with proprietary information and intellectual property. Right, so proprietary information is nothing but information that is being developed, created, discovered by a particular corporation or company, or may be known to be owned by a company that has commercial value. Right, example from SEC USA would be things like a domain name of a company, the trade secrets, copyrights, ideas, techniques, etc., etc. Intellectual property is any unique product of the human intellect that has commercial value. Now, unique product of human intellect can be a very controversial definition, but what we have found from the Dubai Customs is product of the human intellect creating any kind of creativity, inventions, industrial models, designs, symbols, names, brands, of course, literature, song, could be a dance routine, an architectural design, and a whole lot more. So how do we protect this kind of property, right? So there are a variety of intellectual property rights which are out there, but for today, we are actually focusing on the copyright. Copyright is a law that protects any kind of intellectual property that is of the kind of literary work, a book somebody has written, a text, a report, a script, paintings, photographs, drawings, films, music, choreography, sculpture, design of cars, etc., etc. It does give the owner 5 rights: the rights to reproduce the work again and again and again, to distribute the work, to display the work, public, if it needs performance, then public performance, and most importantly, production of derivative work, right? The whole law, the copyright law, kind of expanded greatly since the 1790s, and now it generally covers the duration of the creator's life, plus say about 50 to 70 years, depending on where you are geographically. Now, copyright is a fantastic law because it really appreciates and recognizes the creator of the content. And that's what we're really talking about here today. So then we look at a little bit about remote work and outsourcing. So what is remote work? Remote work is nothing but flexible kind of working, which allows us employees to work from a different location as long as we have a stable internet connectivity. Now, telework is something we've all been familiar with prior to the pandemic, where basically the employees are carrying out their duties and responsibilities in off-site locations. But whenever you think about remote work or telework, of course, it's been fantastic in the last 1 year because of the pandemic, but there are primary concerns against remote or telework because it does bring up a question about the quality of work and, most importantly, the confidentiality maintenance, right? Because you don't no longer have your employee in front of you in your office using office servers, which can have certain limitations put in place, certain security measures that you can put in place. You cannot anymore because people are not within your boundaries. Outsourcing is a fantastic opportunity that businesses do take into consideration because it's a method of dispersing certain types of functions from within the business to outside vendors. IT, for instance, is a huge sector that gets outsourced a lot of the time in many different disciplines, right? Companies don't necessarily have an IT team that does in-house development unless that is a primary part of their business. Most of the time, companies will outsource any kind of software development, implementation, maintenance, training of that software to an outsourced vendor. Insourcing, on the other hand, is basically hiring staff on behalf of the company and giving them some tasks or functions to work internally instead of providing the work to an outside company. So naturally, when you think insourcing versus outsourcing, the primary advantage of insourcing above outsourcing would be that control that you would have over intellectual property. And that is one of the biggest concerns with outsourcing, where you are now having to give up confidentiality and share information, sometimes even proprietary information that has commercial value to your company, could be a secret or a competitive advantage to your company, to a third party company. So what has COVID-19 done for remote work and outsourcing? So obviously, it's been one of the biggest disruptors in the work environment. It is really getting us to stand up and kind of think about work, workspace, and what do we really mean by work hours, and so on and so forth. An interesting statistic that we found in the US, that they did a study which showed that before the pandemic, almost 50% of companies that were surveyed had never had any kind of remote work experience. And by the time 2021 had arrived, and with the COVID-19, it was almost the opposite. Almost 50% of the companies now were working at least 5 days a week remotely from home or wherever else they were located. Governments globally have supported remote work. Just the UAE, for instance, the Federal Authority for Government Human Resources came up with an amazing guide of remote working, so that you could see what it's meant, what it's supposed to be, what the kind of frameworks are. The government went over and beyond to even offer residency visas for remote working individuals, to expatriates, et cetera, et cetera. So governments, not just in the UAE, but globally, have been really supportive of remote work during the pandemic. This also led to a hybrid work model, which basically talks about remote work, which probably is going to persist even beyond what we are seeing now. What it entails is basically rearranging the concept of offices and figuring out what long-term work options are going to look like. And this seems to be more and more what companies are going towards. A lot of companies have already announced they don't necessarily want their people to come back to offices anymore. They're happy to have them work from home. A lot of universities are coming up with hybrid models of work for their faculty members and their students to make education more inclusive and accessible. So a quick question here I would like to ask the audience is what percentage of people work remotely at your workplace? So I'm going to be requesting either Atharv or Shruti to please put the link on the chat. Shruti's already done that. Amazing. Students are the best people to work with. They're so professional and they're so up to date with technology. Thank you, Shruti, for that. So if I could just quickly request the audience to click on that link. It doesn't need you to register or put your private details. It basically is a link with a question and it pops up and it gives you the options. So the options are 0%, less than 30%, less than 50%, less than 70, or greater than 70%. So the question again was, what percentage of people work remotely at your organization? If I could have some more engagement quickly from the audience, that would be really great. So we can already see the hybrid model is kicking in where we no longer have a majority that's working remotely, but majority does seem to be working probably from offices. All right, so moving on. So obviously, because we are online so much, there is this concept of information overload that is happening, right? Again, a quick statistic to give you some idea about what I'm talking about. We have about 7.4 billion people in the world, which is the world population, and about 13.5 billion devices that are already connected, right? We only expect this to be increasing exponentially given what we have seen in the last year with the kind of changes in government laws, in companies being more socially responsible, et cetera, et cetera. But what does this mean actually for information itself? Well, if you look at the technology telephone, it took about 75 years to reach 100 million users. Naturally, 100 million, it's a lot, it's a big number. But then it took Facebook about 5 years to reach that many users. And Pokemon Go, once it became famous, took about 1 month to reach 100 million users. So information is traveling really, really fast because it is right there at the click of a button. You just, put it in any kind of search engine and you'll get the information that you're looking for. What we are predicting is there's about 44 zettabytes of data that exists in the digital universe today. That's a lot of information that you have access to easily at any time, right? So that brings me to this question. Name 3 areas in your organization where functions are outsourced. So once again, you will see our amazing Shruti has already put the link at the chat. If I could just invite the audience to quickly click in and put in your ideas. 3 areas in your organization where the functions are outsourced. So I've already given you an example when we were talking about outsourcing, where a lot of companies seem to outsource their IT functions. So if you could come up with maybe 1, 2, or 3 areas, up to 3 areas, where your organization is currently outsourcing their functions, irrespective of what the organization is. Could be an educational organization, could be a non-educational organization. So we've got IT, we've got accounting. Wow, we've got assessments. Oh yes, catering. Catering is a big one. IT support, so not necessarily IT, but tech support. Yeah, marketing. Okay. So these are all interesting areas. IT support is something quite popular, as I've mentioned. Marketing has really picked up as an industry, being outsourced to specialists, particularly because of the whole concept of digital marketing with the SEOs and how all of this works. A lot of people generally from business backgrounds don't have a very good idea, and they want to maximize their potentials. So perhaps research, yeah, could be. Transportation, oh yes, that's a big one. Okay, so we obviously see there's a wide range of areas where businesses, not just small businesses, but businesses in general will outsource, right? So you've got all of these examples that you gave, but I would like to point out, like for instance, two areas where, for instance, writing blog posts or contents, creative work and design. So anytime there's a proprietary information or IP involved, and that particular business function is being outsourced, that is something that we want to think about in this particular session, right? We've been doing this particular workshop for a while now, like we mentioned, and what we found, areas of business functions in academia that get outsourced, things like admission staff, right? Security staff, administrative staff, HR, marketing, transitional course faculty themselves, specialized course faculties, sometimes even faculties and tutors themselves, exam invigilators. So all very interesting areas of functions that seem to get outsourced. Now, naturally, we've been hearing about all these cyber threats that have been happening. Governments everywhere are boosting their security systems. We've been hearing about crazy data breaches happening in a lot of universities, companies in US, but that's not just US. It's been happening globally everywhere, right? So we do know, because there is a tremendous increase in remote workers, it has increased traffic to high-risk apps. So high-risk apps are anything that could be malicious in nature, that's constantly storing your information, recording your activities online, developing a portfolio of your activities as a company, not just you as an individual. And there has been a 63% increase in malware that gets delivered through cloud-based services rather than web. Now, we know this. This is the cyber threat that everybody, the whole world is talking about. But we're going to talk about a different type of threat today, which is the corporate plagiarism. So plagiarism is a word that is very, very common, very heard of, very known to the academic world. So if you're a teacher, you've got a class full of students, you've been teaching, and particularly in higher education, you would have known what plagiarism is, right? Plagiarism is nothing but the concept where somebody basically takes somebody else's work, puts it in as part of their work, and claims it to be their own without really giving any kind of credit or acknowledgement, right? Some examples that we have provided here: direct copying of or from sources, copying material with minimum change, submission of somebody's past report, paraphrasing work of somebody else without really acknowledging that it's not your own work. So this is plagiarism that we all know. We're
Yes, Miss Vinita, yes, I'm just checking with Dr. Z. If you can just give me 2 minutes, I think she'll be back. Apologies for the delay.
Atharv. No worries. Thank you, Atharv.
You're welcome, miss. Uh, yeah, I guess Dr. Z is back.
Hello. I seem to have happily been thrown out by WebEx. I'm not sure why. So welcome to the pandemic and the technology world, everyone. Okay. So just a quick question. Is this where I stopped? Is this where you stopped hearing me?
No, maybe a slide before.
Yeah,
This
I think
one?
before that.
No, before that.
This one?
No.
Go back. No, no.
This one?
Yeah, this one. And
Wow.
that one.
That's a lot of talking I did to myself.
Next one.
All right. So plagiarism, what I was saying basically is a concept that is very familiar to the education industry. So if you're a teacher, you have students, particularly in higher education, you would know what plagiarism is. It's nothing but the concept where somebody takes somebody else's work and claims it to be their own without really acknowledging or giving credit to the original work or the author. There are certain examples like directly just copying and pasting from a source, taking some material, changing it a little, but still not giving due credit to the original source, right? Now, this leap from academia to corporate world is not such a huge leap because there's quite a bit of research that actually shows that students who have the tendency to engage in academic misconduct in academia, like plagiarism, also demonstrate a propensity for unethical practices in the workplace, which is why we are here today. We want to talk about this concept in the corporate world. Now, we've talked about proprietary information and intellectual property, and we've talked about what copyright is. So now let's talk a little bit about the infringements and plagiarism. So copyright infringement is basically copying somebody's material without permission, but plagiarism is claiming it to be your own. So if you downloaded a music and you listened to it illegally, you are not telling anybody that you sang it, for instance, right? But plagiarism is when you are basically taking that material and then putting your name on it, effectively. That's what it means. Copyright infringement, violating the owner's rights, whereas plagiarism is not providing due credit or acknowledgement of the original source. Copyright infringement has one victim, the copyright holder, whereas plagiarism has two sets. The copyright holder could be the actual person who's created the content, or even the person or the company that holds the copyright of the material, and the other person who you are lying to. Because plagiarism means you've taken somebody else's work and you're telling somebody else that it's your work. That means you're the expert they should go to. You're the expert who knows about the content, and you know enough to create a report or some kind of a material out of it for them, right? So that's why it's got the two sets of victims. It does have certain, overlap, which, like we said, you're taking somebody's work without permission, but there is the legal and the moral side to it where there is a difference. And unfortunately, with copyright infringement, it's illegal. Plagiarism is more of a moral issue. Adding to this concern is the fair use, which is a part of the copyright law that allows you to use copyrighted material without necessarily having to explicitly take permission. But there are some clause to it. For instance, how much amount can you take? Is it impacting the market if you take their information or their material? What is the nature of the work that you're taking, and what is the purpose that you're taking it for? So when you have all of those, like for instance, we will be referring to information all the time when we are teaching in class. this is considered to be fair use. Unless I've taken a whole book, photocopied it, and just made it available to my students, suddenly I'm not, it's not a fair use because I'm going against the copyright of the author or the publisher or the copyright holder. But the problem is fair use also throws up a huge blur line for where copyright stops and where plagiarism and infringement starts. So corporate plagiarism is basically the act of an employee copying and using someone else's or reusing their own work that has already been published or used in some form, generated in some form of revenue, or has the potential to generate revenue for the original work and its owner without explicit disclaimers, permission, or due credit. Right? There isn't an actual definition of corporate plagiarism anywhere, except that it's meant to be exactly what we know plagiarism to be, but not in an academic setting, but in a corporate setting. So just giving you some visual examples, I'm almost out of time and I lost a few minutes with the whole WebEx thing. So I'll go a little fast here. Copyright, this is what it looks like. You've got the original image, which companies will just take and take the design and put it in pillows, in cards, and things like that. It's a huge business, unfortunately, something that companies are constantly working against. There are big companies that do it as well. Like, for instance, I've given you an example of Nike and Skechers here. What it means to be recreating something that already existed, but still could be an issue with copyright infringement. Now, when we think about what are these actions, there's, of course, a whole lot. I've just listed some of these here: counterfeit, infringement, use of the same or similar marks in advertisement, integration of trademarks, etc., etc. When we talk about plagiarism in the corporate world, I've given you an example here where you see this content that's developed on a UNICEF website that talks about the 6 top benefits of hiring young talent. And we found similar content in another company's website where they said 5 benefits of hiring young people. And it's literally the same text. Yet there doesn't seem to be a foreseeable link between the two companies. In the academic world, for instance, on the right, what you see is a slide developed by a particular lecturer, and the same slide that has just been copied and pasted and reused by another lecturer in another subject. So problem of plagiarism isn't just something that happens among students. It can definitely happen among employees as well. What does it look like from all the discussions that we have done and the workshops we've done? It's net lifting, copying just digital content, reproducing portion of someone's work, reusing content in different situations, taking credit for someone else's work. Now, the last one before I finish, do you know someone in your corporation who may have done one or more of the following? Again, Amazing Shruti has put the link already. If you could just quickly click it, and the options are: seen a photo on Pinterest or a video on YouTube that looked perfect for the work. They use it without crediting the creator. Reproduce substantial chunk of someone else's prose, example, an ad campaign or a tutorial assignment or quality report. Taken credit for work by subordinates. Ripped off someone's design or computer code, or none. So if you could quickly click on that link that has been put in the chat and let us know if you know someone in your corporation who may have done one or more of these options. We do know, yes, this is pretty much what we have been seeing in the last 1 year of doing this workshop with different groups of people, that we do know people who are doing this within our corporations. So taking credit for work by subordinates seems to be the most common form of infringement. Moving on. So why do employees plagiarize? What we have found is lack of awareness, unrealistic deadlines, hesitant to show weakness, and too much focus on short-term orientation, like I need to get this done, this has to be done now, let's focus on finishing this now, without really thinking about the future or the implications. Implications, it definitely has a guaranteed loss of trust, negative reputation, loss of face. Legal penalties could lead to monetary penalties. It could stunt innovation, loss of motivation, and of course, ultimately, you lose people because of particularly what you just showed. This number 3, taking credit for somebody else's work, really does lead to attrition. So what is the way forward? We have found corporate culture to be a big thing. If you have a culture in your organization where you are encouraging people to take credit for the work they have done and give credit for work that they have taken from somebody else, employees will automatically follow suit. But if corporate culture says just copy, get it done, and just fast, we don't really care how you do it as long as you do it. Unfortunately, we are giving very different messages to our employees. We need to ensure policies and procedures identify corporate plagiarism explicitly, and the concepts of attribution, raise awareness, provide learning opportunities for employees, provide access to referencing softwares like EndNotes, etc. When they are using Google, something as simple as just telling them, make sure you go to, label for non-commercial use or commercial use, and then look at it, see whether we need to buy a license for it. Find royalty-free websites that give you images, music, video, etc. Understand the concept of Creative Commons so that you know what you can use and what you cannot use, particularly when it comes to a corporate or a commercial environment. So with that, I will end the message. Let's join hands to ignite integrity beyond our classrooms. Shruti?
Thank you, Dr. Khan, for that enlightening talk. We now welcome our first invited speaker of the day. Verena Fluence German is a Chief Marketing Officer at Original, a leading Sweden-based edtech software company. Born in Ulm, Germany, she studied at universities in Tübingen, Beijing, and Taipei. Before joining Original in 2018, she worked for various well-known IT companies in Asia and Europe. Verena is married and lives in Cologne, Germany. Over to you, Ms. Verena.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. Well, we've already heard a lot about copyright infringement and corporate plagiarism. Being from Original, I'd like to shed a light on how original is your content really. Next slide, please. Okay. Just a few words about Original. Well, we are the European market leader in text matching software. I think if you're from the academic world, you might already have heard about Urkun and PlugScan. Well, last year we joined forces and established Original. By that, we have 3 decades of combined knowledge and expertise in text similarity and plagiarism prevention. Well, you know us from the academic world, as I said, but what is most unknown to many people is that we already have a large customer base in the business world. And this is why Dr. Zina Khan invited me today. Next slide, please. Well, Original, you might have seen that already. We often talk about unlocking your full potential. Why do we do that? Well, we don't see ourselves as plagiarism prevention or detection software, but what we do want to do is we want to help to promote and safeguard academic integrity. And how do we want to do that? Well, we want to take a positive approach instead of talking about the negative effects of plagiarism. We want students, and also in this context, in a corporate world context, we want corporations and people to think original. And well, why do we want to do that? We want to safeguard also corporate reputation. I already mentioned what our product does. Well, it's a similarity detection solution, which means that we kind of scan text, which is called text matching. And well, we also have a writing style analysis feature to help to promote originality. Next slide, please. Well, I talked about originality, and I said that I wanted to take a positive rather than a negative approach. So I'd rather focus on originality instead of copyright infringement or corporate plagiarism. So what really is this term originality? Well, I have two definitions. One of that is from the Cambridge Dictionary. It says that originality is the quality of being special and interesting and not the same as everyone else. Well, and maybe you've heard about Dr. Seuss, who's a cartoonist, and I like his definition, to be honest. He says that being original is actually youer than you. Next slide, please. Why is originality important in business? Well, if we look at the business world, content is king, and it got more and more important. Dr. Khan just showed where you actually use content in the previous questionnaire. So it's like content is everywhere in a company, and I'll go through that, the many various forms in a second. Well, content defines who a company is, and it drives business. If you just think about the different areas where content is used and created. In order to differentiate yourself, it needs to be unique, and well, you need to make a lasting impression, don't you? The growing importance of content is, well, it's kind of proven with the changed search algorithm that Google has, for example. You benefit if you have, for example, unique content on your website and don't copy. We saw the kind of example from UNICEF that you showed before, Dr. Khan. And I would say, looking at this from a corporate perspective, well, they didn't do a good job in SEO, because this means that the copied website will have a worse Google ranking than the original website. Next slide, please. Well, we do live in a digitized world, and it got even worse or better during the pandemic. We got the internet hosts a lot of information, and we got digital tools, and this per se makes it very easy to copy and paste content. And well, we already know what plagiarism is, what content theft is, or copyright infringement. So I'm not going into details here. But what is interesting is that only a fraction of the unreferenced copied content will ever be discovered. Usually it's by chance. And if it gets discovered, it can result in prosecution in federal court. And this will mainly result in hefty penalties. And well, the reputation of the company will be heavily damaged. Next slide, please. Who plagiarizes and why? This is an interesting question that we have asked ourselves a lot. Well, it could be someone unknown that just copies your content. Usually, if you, for example, think about copied websites, you don't know who copied your content, and you don't know why they did it. But often it's your competitor as well, or even your own employees. I think we saw that before as well. The reasons for plagiarizing, well, they are kind of the same that we have in education. Why do people plagiarize in education or in academia? Well, students often plagiarize, and this is the same for employees as well, because they have missing knowledge, and they don't really understand what plagiarism is and content theft. Well, there's an immense time and peer pressure. Like, for example, I need to present tomorrow. Let's just go to the internet, copy a few slides or copy a few images, and then put it there. Also, we have corporations that are missing an ethical codex, and well, it's just okay to copy and paste something into a slide and pretend that it's your own. Also, sometimes we do have budget restrictions. Budget restrictions mean that, well, maybe a marketing budget isn't enough, and you just go to the internet, download some kind of image, and then, well, use it by yourself. We also already saw kind of logo, copies of logos, and these kind of things. So it's easy to copy, and why don't just do it? Next slide. Why don't just do it? Well, this is bad, of course, and this leads us to the question, why do companies copy, and how can we prevent it? Well, we at Original have corporate customers all around the globe, and as you can see here, we have just a few. For example, NATO is our customer. We have Tata, we have KPMG, and the interesting part is, and that many of our corporate customers don't want to reveal publicly that they're using our software. Why? Not because they're not happy with our software, but because they do not want the outside world to know that they do use an originality checking software. Why? I'll go through that later on because, well, I'll go through that later. We do have banks, publishers, energy suppliers, lawyers, and well, it's also used across many departments with many different usage scenarios. I'm often asked, well, in a corporation, where would you actually use that? Let's have a look at that. Next slide. Every department almost uses it. I think we heard a lot about marketing, for example. Here we have press releases, studies, website content. We touched on that quite a lot, but also outsourced content. Have you ever thought about what kind of damage could be done to your reputation if you hire a blog writer, for example, or anyone that creates content for you, and then just find out that that person didn't really submit original content, that he just, you know, invoiced you for something that he already sent to another customer. So this is kind of bad for you. R&D, research papers and related documents. If you think about large pharma corporations, for example, here the originality of content, for example, is key. Finance, this was kind of, well, a surprise to me as well, but if you think about it, it makes sense. If you think about financial statements or shareholder announcements or things like that, merger and acquisition documentation, it has to be original because you need to prove that you are you. And sometimes, well, even in the finance department, people just go to the internet, find a nice finance statement and copy that. That's incredible to true. Legal and company administration. Well, if you think, for example, they're kind of boring documents that, well, why wouldn't you just copy paste them? For example, website policies or contracts, or these kind of things often get copied because, well, why would you pay any lawyer just to create this kind of boring document? And now I'm coming to one of the most interesting kind of use cases. It's HR. For example, if you look at the use case in the NATO, NATO uses our software to ensure that the people that work in these very important positions are the people they pretend to be. So they scan every CV, any motivational letter that they send, every assessment center test through our software to just ensure that, well, Europe's and the world's safety lays in the hands of the people that claim to be themselves. Next slide, please. The effects of the pandemic on originality. Well, I think we all do know that our way of working has changed. We shifted to remote work, but what does that actually mean for a corporation? Well, we have less exposure to co-workers, which means that in, you know, the Yeah, which means that they are not exposed to the moral codes. There is no network that, you know, instills that kind of originality and everything. Loneliness is also a factor. Why should they just be original if it's easy to sit there and copy paste content, right? Some businesses grew immensely, like our company, which means that we have increased workload and pressure, but we also had an increase in business closures and layoffs, which also means that, remember the NATO use case, we have a lot of job applications, which is very stressful for both sides. They're often completely online and digital, which means that, well, you often don't see the people anymore that you want to hire. So you need to rely on their application documents. This means, well, taking a shortcut became more tempting. We also saw that in the product usage during the last year. Next slide, please. We saw a huge increase in the submitted documents during the pandemic. By the end of last year, we did a study on how much the product usage changed in its patterns and also in the value volume, comparing 2019 numbers with the numbers of 2020. Here we saw a steady increase of the usage in the last years. And when the pandemic started, it just jumped immensely. Also, we saw that more and more data volumes are being processed, which for us is a strong indication that we actually saw an increased awareness of the dangers of remote environments. And I think this trend is going to continue. Next slide, please. Summary and outlook. The role of originality in business. Well, next slide. We look at the data that has been created, captured, and copied during the last years, and look at the forecast for the upcoming years. We actually see that during the pandemic, more content than predicted has been created, which for us means as well, there's more content that needs to be checked. And well, this is an interesting trend, and this also kind of reminds us that, well, we need to be original, right? Next slide, please. Business in a post-pandemic world. Well, the pandemic helped us to uncover the challenging of producing, handling, and evaluating the originality of documents. And as I said, we saw the trend that companies are now aware of the dangers and do more originality checks. I think one of the most pressing questions we should focus during the next years is, well, how should authenticity and originality be assessed in a digital-only environment? Thank you very much. Next slide, please. I'm happy to hear from you. I think there will be a Q&A session later on. It has been a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Verna. Our second invited speaker of the day is Dr. Laura Gorda. Dr. Gorda is a lawyer with 19 years of international experience. In UAE, she has worked for major investment conglomerates and headed the corporate and commercial practice of reputed law firms. Dr. Gorda has worked across various jurisdictions in the European Union, having a recognized experience in advising high net worth individuals or working at the crossroads of multiple systems of law. A PhD holder in international law, Dr. Gorda has numerous specializations from UK, Netherlands, Spain, India, and China. Her legal practice includes niche areas such as IP, data, outer space law, or disruptive technologies. She is a book author and a university lecturer in law. Over to Dr. Gorda.
Good morning, everybody. It is my pleasure to be here. I feel delighted to be invited to this event. I particularly enjoy the topic. I'm also an academic and I'm teaching and I'm facing plagiarism every day with the students or even at higher environments. But for now, I am here to give a little bit of insight of what is plagiarism from a legal perspective, and how is plagiarism treated in UAE. Plagiarism is defined from a legal perspective as, let's say, copying someone else's literary or artistic creation without indicating the source. And then plagiarism is intimately linked with the concept that we lawyers call copyright. Copyright is one of the most monetized, the most used, and the most widely spread intellectual property rights. And in simple terms, it means the author's rights over the work that he or she has created. And this can be a scientific work, this can be an artistic work, this can be, let's say, anything that differentiates, let's say, an entity from another. Because when we discuss about software, we can discuss about copyright. When we look into a website, the website has an interface. It has a certain, let's say, value in it because it has been created by someone. So this is subject to copyright. In UAE, and I'm going to give a little bit of a broader perspective on what copyright and plagiarism actually means. The problem in the international arena is not new. We have an international convention that has been signed at the level of the United Nations 1886, which is called the Berne Convention on literary and artistic works and neighboring rights. And this is, I'd say, the most well-known legal instrument defining a copyright. UAE is part of this convention from 2004, which means, that's good news, that copyright work that is registered in the UAE can be protected and is benefiting from this protection of copyright in all member states of the Berne Convention, which are now 167. So if you look into the world map, that's probably most of it. Yeah. And then when we discuss about copyright per se, the author of an academic work, of an artistic work, has usually two types of rights over that particular creation: the moral right and the economic right. Because that's why copyright is such a big issue in the business world today. It can be monetized and it has a value. It can be brought to security for investments, for loans, for banks, etc. So the moral right of the author means that the author needs to be recognized as the owner of the work that he or she has created. Whereas the economic right means that the author has the right to sell, to license, to allow others to use his work under specific circumstances. And these are happening usually in the business world against the royalty, which is an amount of money. Whenever these conditions are not met, we are very often in the, let's say, in the hypothesis of a plagiarized work. And this has happened in a lot of cases. There are notorious cases that we all know about. Let's say Madonna, for instance, had a case where she has simply copied a song from someone else. The media is full of this type of situations. The courts are recently called with the highest, let's say, number of copyrighted works in the history due to the era of internet. If I look back into the campaign in the US for the election of Obama, one of the photographers that presented the campaign was sued for copyright infringement. So things can run at all possible levels. From our point of view here in UAE, we have a law that protects the copyright. This is Federal Law number 7 of 2002, and this protects copyright and neighboring rights as well. And then it is very important to know that in order to register a copyright, there's a governmental body who has the ability to do so. This is the Ministry of Economy. Provided that the UAE is party to the International Convention in Berne, the registration can be done in UAE for the US office, for the European Union office, so the options are quite wide. The difference in between the UAE and other parts of the world is that in, let's say, US, for instance, where the IP market is much more commercialized, the copyright is automatically protected. But in here, in UAE, the copyright needs to be registered in order to be protected or to benefit from protection. So at all times, if we wish to benefit from the protection of a copyrighted work, at least the blueprint needs to be registered with the Ministry of Economy. And then the protection granted is for a lifetime for the moral rights and for 25 years for the neighboring rights, for the economic rights that appear for the copyrighted work. Needless to mention, if we look into the recent press in the UAE, copyright infringements are treated very seriously here. If we look into the Federal Law number 7 of 2002, we have seen cases where, let's say, for infringements of copyright, people have been deported. There are fines that are applicable. Sometimes even criminal action can be taken on grounds of fraud, counterfeiting, depending on the case. However, the authorities in here treat the matter quite seriously. Of course, when we discuss in the academia about plagiarized work presented by allegedly a student, it might not be the situation that things go too far. However, the market needs to be made aware that there are legal implications, or that there can be legal implications for plagiarizing work, or for using, let's say, intellectual property without someone else's consent. And in here, I believe that obviously we know that there is a difference in between the rules and the laws. Yeah, since not all rules are laws. Each and every, let's say, entity, body, corporate should probably conduct awareness campaigns explaining that theft of content on websites, on brochures, on social media, or theft of content, let's say, whilst presenting something to a client, it's simply not okay. And then that there can be consequences in that respect. And then if, let's say, a specific university, body, corporate presents or brings along, let's say, a creation that benefits from originality, unicity, they can finally monetize that and bring it as a business asset. For instance, if we look into brands and trademarks, how much it costs. The trademark of Coca-Cola runs probably into the range of a couple of billions of dollars. The logo of Google probably costs somewhere in the same area. So everything is intellectual property. Therefore, I would say that it is very important for the business community, for the academic community to be aware and to make others aware that by creating your own and by treating your own as correctly as possible from a legal perspective, you have a lot of advantages, like a lot of advantages. Yeah, so these advantages usually translate into very onerous ones, amounts of money, royalties, licensing, etc. So from the legal perspective, I would say that I gave a short overview of what copyright means, of what plagiarism means. The change would start with each and every of us. And then finally, of course, if you have questions and answers, I'll be more than happy to respond. I understand that there is a section allocated for that at the end of this discussion. Further on, the discussion on intellectual property can run endless. It's a new domain. It is slightly related to data, which is, again, one of the disruptors that appears in the legal business and in the business community, academia as well. So in terms of recommendations, benchmarking, education are important. Legalities are there, they can be applied, they can be enforced. The governments have a lot of regulatory tools to do so. And then finally, by creating original works, obviously the benefits are much, much, much higher and much sustainable than taking them from someone else as a plagiarized work. I'd like to thank you again for the time, for the invitation, and I hope to speak soon. And I wish everybody a good day. Thank you for this.
Thank you, Dr. Gorda. That brings our first half of the session to an end. We now move to the second half of our webinar, a panel discussion. At this panel, we are honored to invite Professor Gomati KG, Associate Dean College of Medicine, GMU Ajman, and Dr. Christopher Hill, Vice President of the Center for Academic Integrity in the UAE and Associate Professor of Faculty of Education at PUID. The panel aims to address the issues identified in the previous sessions and how the academic community can provide support through capacity building and training. The panel is moderated by Ms. Vinita Matthew, founder of Sustainable Minds. The audience are welcome to put in their questions and queries in the chat, and we will be identifying them to Ms. Matthew to address during or after the panel. Over to you, Ms. Matthew.
Sorry. Thank you so much, everyone. That was absolutely interesting to hear. I think the corporate plagiarism, especially with the plethora of information that's available and freely available to so many people to kind of pick up from anywhere, I think it's become an easy route for so many people. It's kind of so much easier to write content, and like never before, where you don't have to think so much anymore because someone's already written that thought. So without much ado, let's straight away get into the panel session. So my first question is for Dr. Gomti. What, according to you, Dr. Gomti, are some of the key challenges and problems associated with corporate plagiarism, whether it's in the academic institutions or whether that's in the corporate world?
Thank you, Vinita, for asking this question. I have my perspective only from the academic and the university side, and not into too much of corporate world as such. But for every university, especially these private universities in UAE and around the world, we always have one part of it which is works like a corporate sector, right? So we have the marketing, we have the legal, we have the other parts which make the policies, the HR and so on. So while we are very strict with our students regarding all the originality of what they do, the work, and for the research part of it, we are very careful that every paper that's presented is actually, checked and so on. I don't know how much we do for other aspects so much. So actually, I was very curious when I heard about this topic, that we must really look into that as well. The kind of handbooks we prepare, the material that we put on the website, the pictures we use. I think all of us need to be very careful about these things, because confidence in our brand image and our reputation, everything is built over years, and shattering it is very easy. So yeah, it's not that people want to do something wrong, but maybe they are unaware of what they are doing might be wrong. So I think I feel a huge need for educating this group of people as well, and I think that's where we probably play a role.
Chris, would you like to add something to that? Dr. Zeenat?
Kenneth, you want to go ahead?
No, I think you go ahead first. I talked for 30 minutes.
Okay, yeah, sure, thank you. So I agree with my colleague, and I agree with the previous, because I think one of our biggest issues is literally communication. I think within the academic world, however you want to define it, those of us within the academic sort of, lecturers, etc., have a very clear understanding of what plagiarism means in our world and our sort of context. And we enforce it very well. I'm not sure we necessarily educate about it as well as we could, but we have a very clear understanding of what it means and what happens when you go wrong. And then we sort of have an expectation that our students will follow or will learn or will adhere to that. And I think there's often a gap between what we as academics do and what the rest of the university does in terms of that aspect of where information comes from. And I don't think that we're talking two different languages. I just think we're looking at it in maybe different ways. And so having sort of open communication and very sort of common, frequent and transparent training sessions between both academics, this is what it means to us, so that the admin and marketing team can understand the language we use, and vice versa, because it has very serious implications for us, but it has incredibly, as one of our previous speakers said, you get this wrong, you might get deported. You get this wrong, you might go to prison. Like this is not a slap on a wrist at a conference and somebody thinks you're achieved. Like this is the actual genuinely serious sort of aspect of it. And so I think it's very difficult talking to academics because we're convinced we know everything. And therefore we don't tend to listen as much as we should, I think. And it tends to be, we're the true content, right? We're the ones creating scientific knowledge. The rest of the people are just doing brochures or things, and that's not true. Everybody's creating content that has equal value, in terms of the position that the university or the brand has. And so the more we can do to build up that dialogue, I think is better.
Yeah, I think both Professor Gomati and Dr. Chris are right. I'll come at it from a slightly different perspective. Let's not just talk about academics. Like even in universities, we look at policies which are there, very clear, they're very well defined. They're talking about student cheating, like students plagiarizing, what we should do if they plagiarize, what do we do, to encourage, to educate them, to bring about awareness, to detect, to penalize. But very few universities might actually have policies that target the academics, the faculty, or the staff. So we are talking about corporate sectors, right? But even the corporate segment of an academic institution, I think we've got that lacking happening there as well. And you see this, one of the slides that I had presented at the beginning, if you notice, the slides being copied, right? So we automatically assume as faculties of a university or of an institution that the intellectual property that we create kind of belongs to the institution. Sure, it does. But then comes the point of how am I going to be presenting it to the class? Do I just use the same slide somebody previously has used? Or do I make it my own and, in the way that I teach the content, make sense out of it for my classroom? And if I don't do that, we've got the publisher slides, which are readily available. You can just use the publisher slide. But then when you start using somebody else's slide without giving them credit, we are actually also doing exactly what we are telling students not to do. Right. So when we talk about corporate plagiarism, I think it's something that's so much bigger than just talking about the corporate staff. I think we academics ourselves kind of also need to own up to this behavior and say, yes, the awareness needs to happen within us as well. And maybe it needs to start with us. Like we need to be the role models who actually show that, yes, okay, I've taken this slide from somewhere. And this is the person who I have taken it from. I've actually asked them permission. And that kind of would set the tone for my class. And when my students will then graduate and become employees or employers, and they have their own company or they join another company, they will be the ones initiating that corporate culture of giving due credit when you're taking somebody else's work. So I do think the kind of needs to be more internalized with us academics first, maybe. So that would be my 2 cents at this point.
Thank you. Just to add my 2 pieces to it. So I come properly from a corporate world. So I think there is this phrase called lift and shift in the corporate world where, things have been created. So by, go through the trouble of creating something again. But I think when you lift and shift, I think what many people tend to forget is that it's basically just to kind of take that, idea or inspiration from the idea, not to copy as is. So I think in the corporate world, with so much of content being written, whether that's around marketing or whether that's research or whatever, it's so much more easier. I think including something as simple as policies, like, when we write standard HR policies or environmental policies or whatever those might be, it's so much more easier. And there's so much available already. Like, why go through the pain of actually rewriting the whole thing is what many of them think, without thinking that, it might be worth to kind of customize it, think through as to why you're writing this for your organization before actually writing something down. So I think that's something probably an important point to kind of look at as well. I'm just curious to understand a little bit more. So we did talk about this, the legal complications of not having of not looking at plagiarism. But do you think that there's an ethical breakdown of our values or structures somewhere, which is making it easier for many of us to actually copy things without thinking? It's just to anyone.
Chris?
Yeah, the way that information is consumed and the speed with which information is shared digitally has changed the way we understand provenance. So previously, if you had to go to a journal or a book or something and physically find the source, you knew where the information came from. You may still have made mistakes in how you referenced it, but it had a home. Now, if information, you see something on the internet, you're not necessarily sure where it originated. Like, it may have been reshared or posted or amended, and it's a case of, actually, how do I correctly do that? Surely just by reposting something or resharing something, I've in some way attributed it back to where it came from, right? Because I've carried the link on. And so I think the way that not just students, but the way we as people now use information has changed our view on who owns it. And if it's in the public forum, it's public. I think there's that perception. And so I don't think it's people deliberately breaching ethical considerations. I think we don't understand what they are. And possibly they don't even exist in the same way that previous ethics of information flow did. Because the technology is moving so quickly, you see something, you take something, you share it, you've got somebody comments, they share it, they reshare it, and it's a case of, every now and then you'll get a corporate one which says, hang on, I took this photo, I'm a photographer, you need to attribute it back to me because it's part of my licensing as an author. But outside of that, I think, and so then, you go into, whether it's the academic world as a student, say, well, how have you done this? And like, why is this different from everything in my life? And equally the same with policies, as our previous speaker said. I'm just using the same language. Like, does it really matter? And the whole point in the world of academia is you learn from others, you build on their examples. Like, there's a very fine line between using previous information to support your answer and using previous information as your answer. That's not a very big gap. So I think that's an excellent question. And I don't think we have the answer yet to how we deal with this. But we need the awareness that we are, I think.
I agree with Chris too. Yeah, I think it's not that we have lost the ethical values, but maybe we don't know how to apply them in the current scenario. We just don't know what's right anymore, or maybe, as we said, we don't know how to do the right thing. So both things are there. Right now, we don't know what's right and how to do the right thing rather than having lost our ethical values. I think they're there somewhere. We don't know how to apply them to this particular kind of scenarios that we are coming up with.
True. So just kind of going on to the next question. So what in your experience, and if Dr. Zeenath, if you could kind of take this one first, is what in your opinion or what in your experience some of the bigger implications of corporate plagiarism within the academic institutions?
Thanks, Vinita. I think that's a very crucial question to ask, the implications of it. The whole reason we started actually looking at corporate plagiarism was a few years back. I had a student who graduated and became an alumni, and because she had already worked with me on academic integrity, cheating, and plagiarism, she was quite aware as a person, individual, who knew about the issues and misconducts and things like that. And she had actually joined a company where she was in charge of creating content. And at a regular basis, whether it was her boss or the clients, they were asking her to copy existing content and just put it into websites that she was supposed to be making, putting it into. And she was constantly pushing back to the point where she was so frustrated that she reached out to me and she said, what do I do? Because, this is going to cause problems because you'll end up having like 3-4 websites with the exact same content. So I think it does have implications. And I think a lot of the times, exactly as Dr. Chris and Professor Gomati have said, that people don't realize the ripple effect of what can happen if you've done this. Because I had mentioned at the beginning that, if you think about the short-sightedness of people when it comes to doing work and meeting deadlines and having to ensure that you're meeting the bottom line is set. But then what? That then what is what really makes the implications really, really serious. If we are not able to instill these in our students and then they graduate and they become part of the corporate world, they're carrying on this behavior, right? And the corporate world, again, isn't just something outside of us in institutions, whether it's schools or universities, we are facing it. For instance, I wish our original speaker had been able to join in. What Joyce had shared with us at one point when we were discussing is how, for instance, in the UAE, when you submit documentations for accreditation and stuff, they are actually put through these originality checks, to see how much of the reports that we are creating are our own or how much have they been copied and pasted from somewhere else. And as Professor Gomati said at the end, when it comes to looking at those documentations, sometimes you have to stop and wonder, where do I stop reinventing the wheel? The policy already exists. Do I need to restructure, reword every little thing? Or is there a way we can look forward to see how we can reuse material, but with due credit, and it will be okay? So I think we need to get to a point where we say it's okay as long as we're giving due credit for the work that's been done by somebody else, because we don't want to keep reinventing the wheel. At the end of the day, because that in itself has implications. That's a lot of man hours, time, productivity going down, efficiency going down. So there's a lot of factors that come in when you're talking from a business perspective. When you're talking from an academic perspective, students, of course, students are students. That's what we say. They're being given a deadline, they have to finish it. But for a company, not to be able to meet that deadline could possibly mean losing a client, could possibly mean a lot of revenue that could have come in and that doesn't come in anymore. So I think the implications are many-folds, and I think we need to take a step back and think about how do we support the community to be aware, but at the same time create an environment where giving credit becomes priority, so that we can then go back and reuse work instead of reinventing the wheel all the time. I don't know. I'm hoping that answered your question.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Zina. Dr. Gomti, Chris, anything to add to that one?
Yeah, I'm glad Dr. Zina brought up that policies thing, because very often we do find that we are writing a lot of policy, and how much of any policy can truly be original? Because we are going to want to say the same thing. We want to say in a standard policy, we want to address the same point. So very often we do refer to other policies as though everyone makes it really originally from the scratch. So maybe you look at good practices in other places, and you look at how policies, the main points that are addressed in other policies, and you make your own policy and so on. So we are having to make a lot of policies nowadays. And I think it's very important that, as Dr. Zina said, there should be a way to give credit and move on rather than reinvent the wheel.
Absolutely. Chris, anything to add to that one?
Just that I agree. Yeah.
Perfect. So this will bring us to the last question which we have in the panel itself, and after that we will move on to the audience. So what would be the top 3 thing, and you're free to start with whoever wishes to start first. What is the top 3 things you think are very critical when it comes to taking this forward? How do we actually take this forward? How do we start telling people about this more? Like, how do we raise their awareness? So what, according to you, are those three big things we can do?
I can go. So I think just doing this session today, having these audience that we have, I think it's a great start. That means people want to know more, they want to be involved, they want to ask those questions. So I think the community may be getting ready, perhaps because of the pandemic and all the remote work that's going on, that it's kind of flushed the problem up to the surface. Going forward, I think we need more of these awareness sessions to begin with. We need more collaboration between the academic world and the non-academic world, so that we can, because yes, the academic world is a lot more savvy in terms of understanding what is plagiarism, how to go about detecting it, how to go about ensuring that it doesn't happen, how to train people in the proper art of writing an original work, etc., etc. So we need to tap into that expertise and get them to help the other side.
I agree with Venus. I think this has been a beginning. Just the fact that we brought together people from the academic and the corporate world and a legal, person in. I think this combination is what needs to be, done at regular intervals at various workplaces, kind of, so that they get the complete perspective. When academic people talk, they think it's only for them. And maybe we are right. We don't know the legal aspects as well as the Laura would know, for example. So we need to bring together the corporate, the legal, and the academic together the way we have done, and maybe situate it inside each corporate, institution or part of academic university, and have sessions for them, actual workshops, sessions, and it grows like that. Then it becomes the culture of the place. I think we need to have more of these. And while we've done this here, and I have invited all our university people, I don't know how many are actually here. I invited our HR, I invited our marketing, I invited our publicity people and so on, because I wanted all of them to be aware. But then I think that maybe if they haven't been able to attend or something, we must just take this back there and do the same thing at every place. I think that's the best way to make them aware, which is probably the main issue. And then give them a way forward too. Obviously, after becoming aware, you need to know what to do next, how to go about it.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo my colleagues. I think we need to build awareness, we need to build trust, and then we need good examples of what to do. There's a very real tendency here, even just amongst universities where we work, that information isn't shared. It's very secret. It's not, there's a strange tendency. We need to build up this culture of, no, this is normal. We normalize this. We share experiences. We go across the sector, because then the whole thing will get stronger. So yeah, I agree. Build trust, build awareness, and then build practice.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. If there are any questions from the audience, you can please type it in the chat. I don't see any questions at the moment. There are a couple of comments.
So we had a question that came through in the Q&A. Usually the software seems to be copied or becomes similar from one company to another. How do you define or differentiate these in terms of copyright or plagiarism? So I think STEM disciplines are difficult, but there is a lot more leeway in STEM disciplines in terms of whether it's attribution, but also derivative work, right? So when we talk about softwares, from what I know, is the logic of development is crucial to deciding the ownership. and authenticity, originality. Two people could come up with the same idea, but they could probably develop it very differently. Right. Of course, again, we've got a lot of free codes available for people, open source codes that are there. But then the community has grown in a manner where they know if they're using open source codes, there are kind of clause to the usage, right? I can use it for my own good, but then I need to then upload back what I have added to, so that the greater community can appreciate and then benefit from it as well. So I think, yes, companies may come up with similar products, but they won't be the exact same products. And a lot of the time with software industries, it's about the first one in the market, who's the first one who came out with the idea, and they kind of become the leaders in that. If you think about Apple and iTunes and iPods and the way they did it, they were the first in the market. And of course, later on people came, but people know they are the ones who are the leaders in the market because they were the first ones who came up with that idea. So I'm hoping that answers that question.
I don't see any other questions, and I think our time is almost up. So thank you so much, Dr. Zeenat, Dr. Gomti, and Chris, for the wonderful thoughts and insights. And I think there is definitely awareness needed, because I think, as all of you rightly said, many people are not aware that they're actually plagiarizing. They're kind of picking up content and they think it's absolutely fine because it's available on the internet. It's there in the public domain. So why, how does that become an infringement? So I think that awareness needs to be raised. And I think there's also probably something to think about, maybe actually creating a small guidebook around this, which can be shared with corporates, which can help them to understand this better, and also with academic institutions as to, how this works. And what are those little things you need to consider when you start looking at content and rewriting it, even whether that's policy or research or whatever that might be. So thank you so much. And we hope everyone enjoyed this session. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Over to Serene.
Thank you everyone for your time. Thank you all speakers, partners, and audience. We look forward to seeing you in our future events.
Thank you so much, everyone. Wonderful to have everybody here. If I could kindly ask the MCs and the speakers to please activate your webcam so I could take a group photo. And we welcome questions and comments. Everybody has the email addresses, so if you can just drop us your messages, that would be really great. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.